Nearly 5,000 years ago, terrified and desperate Stone Age people begged for the sun to reappear in the blackened sky, and desperately made decorated stone offerings to appease the forces of nature. This was the case for the Neolithic people on the mysterious Danish island Bornholm 4,900 years ago. They sacrificed hundreds of stones engraved with sun and field motifs, which archaeologists and climate scientists from the University of Copenhagen can now show coincided with a large volcanic eruption that made the sun disappear throughout northern Europe. Throughout history, volcanic eruptions have had serious consequences for human societies, such as cold weather, lack of sun, and low crop yields. In the year 43 BC, when a volcano in Alaska spewed large quantities of sulfur into the stratosphere, harvests failed the following years in the countries around the Mediterranean, causing famine and disease. This is well documented in written sources from ancient Greece and Rome. We do not have written sources from the Neolithic, however. But climate scientists from the Niels Bohr Institute at the University of Copenhagen have analysed ice cores from the Greenland ice sheet and can now document that around 2900 BC a similar volcanic eruption took place. An eruption that must have had equally devastating consequences for the Neolithic peoples who lived in northern Europe at the time and who were deeply dependent on agriculture. The force, awe and devastating consequences of the volcanic activity appears to have led to a ritual sacrifice of specially designed stones, perhaps to appease some deity that the Stone Age people attributed to the tectonic terror. These so-called sunstones, which are small flat shale pieces with finely incised patterns and sun motifs, are known only from the island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea, where they appear at two locations on the southern part of the island, Rispebjerg and Vesergaard, around 2900 BC. Both sites belong to the late part of the Neolithic funnel beaker culture, which, among other things, was responsible for the many dolmens and passage tombs found across Denmark. These new insights into the climate episode in the Neolithic period have led archaeologists from the University of Copenhagen, the National Museum of Denmark and the Museum of Bornholm to view their findings of so-called sunstones from the Neolithic Vesergaard site on Bornholm in a new light, and they have just published an article on the discovery in the journal Antiquity. Rune Iversen from the University of Copenhagen, who has participated in the excavations at the site, said, "We have known for a long time that the sun was the focal point for the early agricultural cultures we know of in northern Europe. They farmed the land and depended on the sun to bring home the harvest. If the sun almost disappeared due to a mist in the stratosphere for longer periods of time, it would have been extremely frightening for them." He added, "One type of find that is completely unique to Bornholm is the so-called sunstones, which are flat shale pieces with engraved patterns and sun motifs. They symbolised fertility and were probably sacrificed to ensure sun and growth." Sunstones were found in large quantities in the Vesergaard West site, where residents deposited them in ditches forming part of a causewayed enclosure, together with the remains of ritual feasts in the form of animal bones, broken clay vessels and flint objects around 2900 BC. The ditches were subsequently closed. Mr. Iversen and his colleagues believe there is a very high probability that there is a connection between the volcanic eruption, the subsequent climate changes, and the discovery of the ritual sunstone sacrifices. He said, "It is reasonable to believe that the Neolithic people on Bornholm wanted to protect themselves from further deterioration of the climate by sacrificing sunstones, or perhaps they wanted to show their gratitude that the sun had returned again." The researchers can document reduced radiation from the sun and consequent cooling, which can be traced to both the United States and Europe around 2900 BC. Dendrochronological analyses of fossil wood show signs of frost in the spring and summer months, both before and after 2900 BC. And ice cores from the Greenland ice cap and Antarctica contain sulfur, which is a sign of the occurrence of a strong volcanic eruption. As if an acute climatic deterioration around 2900 BC was not enough, northern European Neolithic cultures were also affected by other disasters. New DNA studies of human bones have shown that the plague was very widespread and fatal for many. During the same period, archaeologists can also document a shift in the traditions they had held onto for a very long time. The so-called funnel beaker culture, which had been dominant until about 5,000 years ago, with its characteristic ceramics and passage graves, was gradually disappearing. Mr. Everson said, "At the causewayed enclosure we have excavated on Bornholm, we can also see that, after the sacrifice of the sunstones, the residents changed the structure of the site, so that instead of sacrificial ditches, it was provided with extensive rows of palisades and circular cult houses. We do not know why, but it is reasonable to believe that the dramatic climatic changes they had been exposed to would have played a role in some way." 4 of the sunstones from Vestergaard on Bornholm can be viewed at a prehistoric exhibition at the National Museum of Denmark in Copenhagen. They likely exemplify one of the earliest depositional practices connected to a Neolithic sun cult in South Scandinavia, which are also known from the later Nordic Bronze Age, with objects like the Trundholm sun chariot and sun holder also from Denmark. Lasse Viljen Sorensen, senior researcher at the National Museum of Denmark and co-author of the research paper, said, "The sunstones are completely unique, also in a European context. The closest we get to a similar sun cult in the Neolithic is some passage graves in southern Scandinavia, or henge structures like Stonehenge in England, which some researchers associate with the sun. With the sunstones, there is no doubt in my mind. It is quite simply an incredible discovery which demonstrates that depositions honouring the sun is an ancient phenomenon, which we encounter again in South Scandinavia during the climate disaster caused by a volcanic eruption in the year 536 AD, where several large gold hoards were deposited as sacrifices." The paper is entitled "Sunstones and the Darkened Sun, Neolithic Miniature Art from the Island of Bornholm, Denmark." Its abstract read, "The discovery of more than 600 whole and fragmentary engraved stone plaques in the early 3rd millennium BC infill from the ditches of a causewayed enclosure in Vestergaard on the Danish island of Bornholm represents a unique find in Neolithic miniature art." Termed sunstones in reference to the rayed images that characterise many of the plaques, the stones were deposited en masse over a short period. This article offers a fundamental classification of the rich imagery captured in the engravings and examines its potential function at a time of possible climatic crisis that impacted not just Bornholm but the wider northern hemisphere. In later years, Bornholm has been associated with so-called sacred geometry and connected with the Knights Templar. The late British author and esoteric theorist Henry Lincoln and co-author Erling Jorgensen argued that the island's round churches were arranged in a precise geometric pattern, which they believed was deliberate and had astronomical significance. They speculated that these alignments may have been used to track the movements of the sun, possibly as a form of solar calendar or for religious rituals tied to solar events like solstices. Whatever the truth of the later theories, it seems the sun has held powerful ritual significance on the island of Bornholm for thousands of years, and for believers in alleged sacred geometry, it still does. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. And you can also support the channel on Subscribestar via the link in the description, or via YouTube Super Thanks. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.